Right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to say good morning to some and good afternoon to many. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. I am personally very excited to continue this journey through our gut with our very helpful expert, Dr. Rick Henriksen. He's also on the line.
That was a good pun there.
I know. I was trying to think of something that wouldn't make it too gruesome, so we'll go with that. To give a warm welcome to him to continue this series that we've begun with him. He is an amazing Salt Lake City-based board-certified family physician. He has a practice here in Salt Lake City. It's a direct primary care physician called Kestrel Wellness. He also does some virtual online care as well through SteadyMD, which I believe, Dr. Henriksen, you're going to talk a little bit about at the end of your presentation.
Correct.
Anything else that you want to introduce yourself with to kick it off before we jump into the system?
Oh, gosh, I mean, that probably sounds good to me. I think hopefully if the 62 people that are currently attending have heard me before, they came back. So that's maybe they know it a little bit. So
I hope so. If not, then all of those that join us afterwards, they can watch your whole series recorded, which is even more beneficial.
There you go.
Perfect. So Dr. Henriksen, I am happy to advance the slides for you. So I will kind of wait for the pause and I will do that for you so we can jump in from here.
Okay, sounds good. This is the next part in the series of our gut health lecture series. We have talked previously a couple times, and we're going to do a little bit of review on what we talked about before. So why don't we go to the next slide? So for today, we're going to review IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, which we talked about last time. We're going to talk about the microbiome, a little bit about fermented foods, and then probiotics. So just a recap, the gut health is of utmost importance. So it is our gut is this window to the rest of our body. It helps with detoxification, with immunity, with absorption of nutrients, with all of these really awesome properties. And whenever I talk about what the gut does, these three things are kind of the main three topics: absorption, protection, and the microbiome, this jungle of bacteria that we house. And for today, we're obviously going to be focusing on this microbiome. The other lectures, we did the absorption and protection, and then let's recap just a little bit on IBS. In the next slide, we see that IBS is a series of symptoms that is due in part to the absorption of sugars or saccharides. So really what we're looking at is that this is the symptoms that we get on the next page from not taking in and not absorbing the food very well. So what happens is we eat something, it doesn't get absorbed, and then it goes down the rest of the tract and either gets to the bacteria for fermentation or it causes something called osmosis. But really IBS causes all this bloating, the bad gas, abdominal pain, diarrhea. So these are this symptoms, this kind of series of symptoms that we call IBS. So in talking about that, we talk about the next slide, these fermentation, this process that happens that bacteria or yeast will ferment these sugars and cause this gas to be formed. So as we can see, this trying to decrease the amount of absorption or make sure that we have the right kind of microbiome can really be helpful in treating our symptoms of IBS. And one of the ways that we do that, next slide, is through the removing of different foods that we call FODMAPs, these fermentable saccharides, and this is a big list of them that cause problems. So as you can see in that kind of bold text there, excess fructose causes these foods to get fermented by the bacteria, and that causes the gas and other problems. Lactose, fructans also causes problem. Galactans, which is what's in beans, causes the issue. And then these polyols or sugar alcohols. So if we can eliminate those foods, that's the first step really into helping to figure out if you really do have IBS or if there's something else going on. So next slide. So that's really kind of our quick summary on IBS. So then, that kind of revolves around having this microbiome. And so when we're looking at our millions and trillions actually of cells in our bodies, actually, we look at this microbiome as everywhere on us, located in and around our body. We have almost or more, depending on some folks, more cells, more other organisms than cells in our body. So we are really this kind of composite system of human and bacteria and these other organisms that grow with us and cause all these really awesome benefits. Today we're going to primarily focus on the gut, but these bacteria and the microbiome is everywhere on our body. So let's just look at the next slide. And this is where, this is a really cool slide. This is something from New York Times they published. And this looks at the family tree of the microorganisms that are on our body and where they're located, what percentages, what types. So the next slide, we're gonna zoom in on the bottom right section of this. And you can see in the mouth. So the mouth has a lot of different strep bacteria. So strep is what causes strep throat, obviously. And they're all in the mouth. So we always have strep in our mouths. So having a strep throat is when things get out of whack and we have an overabundance of one type of streptococcus. But we always have streptococcus in our mouths. And especially, like, for example, in the cheeks, we have this very specific specialized type of bacteria called Streptococcus mitis. In the vagina, on the other hand, we have a lot of lactobacillus. So this is a very different type of bacteria that is mainly in it's in lots of areas, including the gut, but in the vagina, it almost has all of this one type. So we can see that when we talk about the microbiome, we have to talk about the right types of bacteria in the right places. If we get bacteria or other organisms that are not in the right place or not the right types in the right place, then we can have problems. And so we really are just now kind of understanding how this whole microbiome works and how we can get the right bacteria and the right microorganisms in the right places.
And Dr. Hendrickson, just a question with that as I'm thinking about it, because I'm kind of your strep candidate. I get it twice a year, no matter what, no questions asked. And it's one of those where I think, is there different, microbiomes? Does that change seasonally? Because I think it does for me when I'm thinking about my strep throat cases that I get. Is it something that does change seasonally with things that are happening within our environment in the flu season?
Yeah, I mean, I think that definitely can happen. I don't think we have a lot of really awesome data on what happens there, but if we get sick, your microbiome will change. It'll change depending on different types of foods you're eating, and we're going to look at that a little bit later. And it could definitely change depending on what's going on in your environment as well. And in the winter months, I don't know when you get strep throat more often, but if you're around folks that also have this type of Streptococcus A, then you're going to be more likely to get that kind of overabundance as well. So it really includes environment, but also the type of bacteria and microbiome that you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, next slide. So the microbiome is not just this the group of organisms that feed off of us, but actually they produce and are involved in all kinds of different processes that really, like, we think about what makes us human and things that we do and diseases we have and syndromes. The microbiome and bacteria are involved in almost all of those. So there are really interesting studies that look at twins, and you'll have a different microbiome in one twin than the other, and one will be obese and one will not. They've done these a lot in mouse studies, for example. Your mood changes based on what your microbiome is producing. So you get different factors and different vitamins that are expressed and created by that microbiome in your gut. And your mood can actually go correlation with what's being produced there. Your DNA, what's being expressed, what proteins are made, that can actually change. Heart disease risk, liver disease, there actually is a very interesting study recently on the microbiome and fatty liver disease. And then obviously an autoimmune disorder. So this bacteria, this microbiome creates this symbiotic relationship of creating this barrier and this safe place that is supposed to protect us from invading and bad things that come in, these protozoa or these viruses that are going to cause issues. And so these all work together and create this system that helps keep us who we are. And so sometimes when that goes awry, or in our modern life when we're not quite in symbiosis or we're not really working well with that microbiome, we get we get breakdown and we get disease and we get problems with that. So it's very complicated. I'm not going to stand here or sit here and do this video and say in 30 minutes I can tell you everything about this microbiome. But at least this can give us a kind of a step in that process. Okay, so other things that it does. So how does the gut microbiome really interact? So it helps us in breaking down food products. It helps us in our nutrition, absorption of nutrients. It actually creates vitamins and nutrients for us that we then absorb. So we feed the bacteria in our gut, and they in turn will give us vitamins and other nutrients. So it's a really interesting relationship of when we get rid of, if we have a damaged microbiome, we sometimes will be low in certain vitamins. And so that is definitely something that happens. But it also, when it goes awry, when we have problems, it can cause excess gas and bloating and diarrhea and constipation, like in IBS. And so we're really looking at this, trying to get this balance. And it's really interesting that we're trying to figure this out without a lot of super deep knowledge, right? We have some studies, but we don't totally understand exactly how it's all working.
And that makes sense to me too, because we are all so different. As you were saying earlier, the microbiome of every single person is, slightly different. So you would think it would be hard to pinpoint that. Yeah.
So next slide. So what affects your gut microbiome? We're going to talk about this. So how is yours and mine different? Well, it depends on a lot of different things. So number one, hygiene. So depending on, as a kid or even now, how are you around dogs? Are you getting more dirt from the soil from your vegetables or not? Are you super aggressive in washing your hands or using alcohol? Like, all of these are going to change your gut microbiome. And over-aggressive hygiene is definitely going to change what's happening inside of your gut. There have been really interesting studies. So C-sections or vaginal births. So when a baby is born vaginally, they will actually get more of the bacteria that is from the mother's GI tract. So they'll get that kind of gut bacteria. But if you're born by C-section, you're not getting that, and instead you're getting skin bacteria. So you can look at babies, and when babies are first born, they don't have any bacteria in that gut. And when they're born, they get populated by either the skin bacteria or the vaginal bacteria and also the gut bacteria. And that changes the way that the babies actually interact. Breastfeeding or not breastfeeding will change what is going on in the microbiome. We have this kind of evolving microbiome all through our childhood, allowing our kids to eat dirt and playing outside and doing those things that are actually going to help them create this microbiome that can protect them from viruses and create this immunity to other problems later in life. So this is actually like when you see your kid or something, or your baby like eating something off the floor, like our first instinct is like, stop, don't do that. But in all actuality, that like maybe is a beneficial thing for them because it could increase that microbiome. So where we live changes. So we can look at people living in the United States, or in different parts of the United States have different microbiomes, and they're doing some really interesting things. There's a thing called the Human Microbiome Project, and actually is getting people all across the world to send in their microbiome so we can test, see where different bacteria are more common than other places. Other things that will change and affect our microbiome is eating refined carbohydrates, processed foods. So these are actually going to feed the bacteria in different ways. They eat what we eat, and so we have to really be careful about what we're putting in our bodies, because this can actually sometimes disturb what's going on. So we have this very nice, friendly homeostasis, this environment that's healthy. But we can disturb that by changing the way we eat things. So fermented foods, or if we can bring in those fermented foods, that will actually change and bring in some of those different and what we hope are more normal and healthy microorganisms. The amount of fermentable fibers, so prebiotics, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, can change what happens as well. Next slide. So other things that can affect it. So antibiotics. So if you take an antibiotic as medicine, is absolutely going to, a very broad spectrum antibiotic will really do really take a hammer to the gut, and the microbiome that's housed there will really kill off a lot of those bacteria. But even just in small ways, so there are antibiotics in our food, in our water, depending on where you get your meat. If you're not getting it like locally sourced and from a farmer, like you're getting antibiotics in those foods. And those can actually cause problems to our gut. So these are things that we don't even necessarily, a lot of them we don't have a lot of control over. Like the water we drink, for example, we definitely get changes in our microbiome, but from those things that are in our environments as well. Other things, medications like hormonal birth control, or just hormones in general, ibuprofen, others, lists and lists and lists of medications that can that can affect the microbiome. And then obviously getting an unwelcome bug like Giardia or Salmonella or some other type of, like hepatitis virus, that is definitely going to change the microbiome in our gut and make yours different than it will make mine. And then artificial sweeteners has actually been a really interesting study recently, the effect of artificial sweeteners on the gut microbiome and the problems it can cause there as well. So all of those things that I listed, like not all of them are bad, but some of them are. And so we have to look at how this is going together. But really, like, if you had an issue, if you had a problem, if you were depressed or you had anxiety, or if you have gut issues, this is where you really need to find like a highly qualified provider and doctor to help you look through those issues about what's going on, to help you retarget and fix what's going on in your microbiome as a part of the solution to your problem. And so this is hard, right? It's hard to know because there are so many factors, and so we do our best and work through those, and that's something that you want to look at with a physician.
Absolutely. And we have a question that came in as well, which is kind of interesting. It may go back to your FODMAP a couple slides ago, but someone is asking about spicy food. Someone eats a lot of that, and does that affect the gut health of a certain individual?
Yeah, so some spices and some herbs will actually be beneficial for bacteria. Some of them are going to destroy the bacteria. So oregano oil, for example, is an herb that we often use to actually kill some of the bacteria. So they will definitely have their effects, but just because something is like hot with like a spicy pepper doesn't necessarily mean it's like killing the bacteria. It can have some effect, but we don't know. Like, they're different depending on which of the spices that we're using.
Great.
Okay, so fermented foods. So we definitely want to have a healthy microbiome. We want to have a good number of species. We want to have we don't want to have an overwhelming number of one versus the other. We want there to be this homeostasis. And so fermented foods is one way that we can improve and get that going. So this is something that is really easy to say. It's like easy to say, go eat fermented foods, but it's hard to do. So these are some of the most common things that we look at. So kefir, which is a yogurt kind of dairy product, and these are great. You can look at some that are low sugar options and can help you with that. But if you have trouble with dairy, some of these are lactose free, some of them are not. But there are other things that we can do. For example, kombucha. Kombucha is a style of fermentation that takes a kind of a base, including that can be like a tea, it can be a coconut water, it can be just water. There's a lot of different varieties, and then it ferments this using a fermentation process and creates this fermented drink. So that's one option as well. So some yogurts. So the yogurt's not like your standard Yoplait with lots of sugar is definitely not going to be something that you're looking for here. But looking at a high quality yogurt that could cause that. Sauerkraut. Once again, so in all of these foods, you can have sauerkraut or kimchi or any of these that are made in this process, but that the bacteria have then been killed afterwards. So we actually have to make sure and buying a high quality product that is going to be one that has this fermentation process still happening. So you'll see if you go to the grocery store and you go to buy some sauerkraut. So some of the sauerkraut are sealed in jars, and those generally don't have any of the bacteria in them. But if you go to the like refrigerated section, they'll have some that have a bag that actually are letting gas out, and those are more likely to have healthy populations of good bacteria that then you can eat. Same thing with kimchi or pickled beets, pickles. Actually, you can get fermented pickles. So all of these foods you can try, or you can do at home, which I have not done, but I hear isn't too hard of a process to make these fermented foods. So in addition to kind of not eating the foods that are going to cause problems, we can also add these in with fermented foods.
And in terms of those questions that or the the foods that cause problems, I should say. I think
Yeah.
we've all had those leftovers. We've all had that cheese with mold on it or the bread that we carve off. Are those some of the examples of, some of those things that maybe we should steer from because maybe they do have the bad bacteria on them?
No, that is
Okay, totally
actually,
different.
totally different. So, obviously, like eating moldy food, you can get problems with it. Mold is actually a yeast, and and you can get some issues with that. But really, so you can definitely get bacteria or salmonella. You can get these dangerous disease-causing bacteria, and that can cause a problem. But you can also be eating foods, and bread is a good example. So bread actually feeds the bacteria in your gut in a way that is not super healthy for long-term sustainability of that microbiome. So trying to cut out processed carbohydrates is actually going to go benefit to your microbiome. But if you don't eat any processed carbohydrates, if you don't eat any carbohydrates and you have a low level of ferment or soluble fibers, then your gut actually can have problems too, because your bacteria that live there don't have enough to eat. And so you definitely have to kind of look at a balance, but make sure you're getting soluble fibers and eating some potatoes and sweet potatoes and those things that your gut microbiome can eat, but trying to steer away from the highly processed foods that are going to disrupt that microbiome.
Right. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, next slide. All right, so what is a prebiotic? So this was a question that multiple people asked when we sent that through. Actually, go back. So a prebiotic is simply a food source for the bacteria. So what it is there are these soluble fibers. These fibers, this basically carbohydrate, that's a food source for the bacteria. So if you look on bottles of prebiotic or probiotics, it will usually say like a whole list, and then it might say like chicory root or inulin or some type, or like potato starch. So those are packaged sometimes with probiotics or even on their own to help feed the bacteria that you're giving yourself. So a prebiotic is a food that then we want to help grow the good bacteria. The problem with some prebiotics in some people is that they will also grow bad bacteria. So if you have problems, or if you have diagnosed a SIBO or something similar to that, or IBS, a prebiotic can actually make your symptoms worse. So FOS is another one that's commonly used, and this is just fructans packaged together. Chicory root or inulin is just a bunch of food that the bacteria will eat and actually can cause symptoms in people with IBS. So if you have IBS, you got to make sure that you don't take a prebiotic that has a probiotic that has a prebiotic. Okay, so a prebiotic is the actual organism. The prebiotic is the food for the organisms. Does that make sense, Sarah?
It does make sense. Yes, feeding the beast is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the pre causes the biotic. I guess is what what it's called there. Yeah. Okay, so that was that question. Let's go to the next one here. So, okay, so how do probiotics work? This is actually something we don't really know. So we used to think that probiotics worked by like filling up the tank of like bacteria in your stomach, in your gut. So if you think about it, like we thought, well, if you don't have a lot of good bacteria, we'll pour in the good bacteria and then it'll repopulate and you'll have a lot of good bacteria. And actually now we've come to kind of see that does not actually work very well. So if you give, then they've done studies in humans and in mice, if you give us probiotics, our level of bacteria of those bacteria we're giving ourselves. So if you take that bacteria, after about 4 weeks, and even if you look longer, we will actually revert back to our regular gut microbiome. So we call this colonization. Colonization is when we give ourselves something and it stays there long term. So that does not happen always. In some people, it happens more. So some people are high colonizers. They'll let the probiotics will really fuel and increase the amount of bacteria in their gut. Other people, like there is no long-term effect on how many bacteria you have. But all is not lost, because probiotics have important effects. Even if they don't stay around long-term, they can actually affect your hormones. They can actually affect your mood. they can actually have some of these beneficial things on this kind of short-term basis. And they can actually improve the kind of microbiome environment, even if they don't stick around long-term to kind of colonize that environment. So this is an area that there's a lot of, like, these studies are coming out like right now, like how these actually work to improve symptoms, because there are now like hundreds of studies that show probiotics improve diarrhea, that show probiotics improve mood, that probiotics improve XXX. But the question is, like, how are they actually doing that? And so that's where people are studying now. So you're going to see studies, and one just came out that's like, if you take a probiotic, it's gone in 5 months, so don't take it because it's worthless. Well, the question is, like, is it worthless, or is it doing something else that we don't totally understand? And I think that's probably where there's maybe a balance in there, is that I think that probably for most people, taking a probiotic without any symptoms or without any plan is probably not helpful, but it might be if we're targeting some specific issue, or if we're using these in a specific plan, and that's how we should be using these.
Right, yeah. So with someone who has IBS, for example, a prebiotic is not recommended for them. However, the probiotics very well, from what you just said, could relieve so many of those awful symptoms that they may be seeking.
Yeah, so yeah, not alone. It can help, but sure, it's part of the kind of protocol that we use to try to improve some of those areas. Yep.
Great.
Okay, so I'm running out of time here, like always, but I think we're almost to the end of the slide. So this was the next slide. So benefits of probiotics. So they've been shown to help in gut symptoms, fatty liver disease, decrease anxiety, correct estrogen dominance, hormone levels. And this is a link that actually has a really cool list of studies that probiotics have been shown in, and the levels of evidence. So you can kind of check that out. It has a bunch of studies that are pretty cool that you can look at.
Great.
So does everyone need to take it? I kind of already answered that. So probably not everyone, unless there's a specific issue. But I think it's one of those things where it isn't going to hurt. There are very few studies that actually probiotics do any damage or cause side effects. There are, if you have immune compromise, so you're taking long-term issues like for organ transplants, or you have a serious autoimmune disease that is causing you to not have a good immune system, then they can maybe be a problem. But in general, people, they don't cause any issues. So it's one of those, like, does everyone need to take it? Probably not, but it's probably not going to hurt you either. You know, if you're eating fermented foods and taking a probiotic, it's probably not hurting you. So then it could provide some benefit. Okay, so different types. So this was, a lot of people had questions about the different types of probiotics and which one should I buy. So in my last like 2-3 minutes here, that's kind of what I want to address, and I'm not going to give people a very satisfactory answer. So there are different types of probiotics. So number one, there are some you put in the fridge and some you don't put in the fridge. And like, it's very frustrating, and we don't really, and people go like, why, what's the difference? And people are always like, you should only buy the ones in the fridge, and some you should not ever buy the ones in the fridge. So there are soil-based spore type probiotics, and these are a different type of probiotic in that instead of the actual bacteria, instead we have a spore of that bacteria that then will grow and form. And these are stable without refrigeration. And are kind of a different class and can be used. They're not the like common like lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. It's a little bit different than those. Now, so if we look at the kind of excluding those other ones, there are some that still don't require refrigeration that are shelf stable. And these, I personally like getting shelf stable ones, but you have to make sure you get a high quality shelf stable probiotic, because some of these that are just sold on the shelves actually may not have many live organisms. So you have to be careful. You have to buy a high quality product to make sure that it actually has live organisms. Make sure it has independent testing done on it, et cetera, et cetera. So the other thing that a lot of people were questioning about, do they actually get into my body? So does the acid just kill it in my stomach? And yes, the acid will actually kill some of the bacteria in the probiotic. But that's why you want to get one that has an enteric coated, if possible, that help it get down into the GI tract and past that acidity. But you will have, even if some of them or a lot of them are killed in the stomach, you actually will have some that will still transfer down into the lower gut. And the most common types, but there's a lot of different types of bacteria, but you want to get some that are normally in the gut, so that's very important. You want to get a combination of those that are normally housed in the gut lining and in the stool. And commonly these are lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. Lactobacillus is in yogurts and etc. and are very common types to get. Next slide. So which one do you buy? So it's really tough. So number one, finding a high quality brand that has been independently verified to have live bacteria after it's been processed and shipped is the most important thing. So you definitely need to be looking out for that. So another thing is you have to just know yourself. So yes, there are great ones that keep in the fridge, but if you keep a probiotic in the fridge and you never remember to take it, then it's not doing you any good. If you're traveling a lot and you have a fridge stable one, you can't take it with you, then it's not doing you any good. So maybe having a couple different ones, or maybe having a fridge one when you're home and remember to take it, and keeping a shelf stable one that you can take traveling. Those are kind of a good combination, is that you can use these in a different ways, but you just have to know yourself on how you're going to use that. So you definitely want a probiotic that has a few different species. Anywhere from 4 to 8 to 12 is probably a good number. You definitely want to make sure that it has enough of the high amount, but don't get oversold. So some will be like, it has 50 kajillion and it costs like twice as much as the other one that has fewer. You don't need to necessarily get oversold either on buying the high amount. So one of the things that I like to tell my patients is, take a look at the number of species, the number of the units that it has, and then take a look at your pocketbook and see how much you're willing to spend. But make sure you get on a high quality brand in that as well. So it's kind of a lot of those are together when you're looking at those. But then also when you're buying them, make sure you check the recommended number of pills per day, because sometimes what will happen is there'll be a pill that has it'll say it's pretty cheap, but then you have to take more of them each day to get the same number of units as another probiotic. So you have to kind of look at that as well in your balance. So that's kind of like my general guide. And then in my next slide here, as kind of the last hurrah. So these are some options, but are definitely not recommendations from me. These are options in the specific categories that you can look at that are pretty high quality and have been independently verified. So one that's a spore-based one is called Mega Spore Biotic, which is sounds like a dinosaur. But that one is in that area is one that you could look at. For one that is a fridge stable blend, it's called Lacto-Bifido Probiotic Blend, and this was made by Functional Medicine Formulations. And this is a pretty good one that has some good independent studies done on it as well. If you're looking for that's shelf stable, there's one's called Primal Probiotics, which is a really good brand, and it's actually not too expensive and can work really well. And then I actually those ones you kind of all have to. Some of them are going to be locally, but most of them you have to buy online. In the local shops, there's a brand called Gyrodophilis EPS, and that's actually one that I've used and recommended to a lot of folks. It's not too expensive. It has some good independent verification, and actually one that I have had some good success with. So another reason I like it is it's in blister packs, they're wrapped in blister packs. It's easy to travel with. So that's one you can find locally. So these are all options, definitely not recommendations from me, but I would say all possibilities. And I know that's not a very satisfactory answer for all the people that wanted me to tell them exactly which one to take, but I think work with your doctor and really try to find out from what they see and what specific problem you have, because there are going to be bacteria and probiotics that are geared towards your specific issue also that have been studied. So definitely look at what you're trying to take it for and then make a decision based on the other kind of buying guide that I gave you. So I think, let's see, I think with that, Tara, okay, the end. So this is actually an old map. So SteadyMD sees patients across the country, and I see folks, any of these red states, and actually all the blue ones now I'm also licensed in. So if you're in any of those states, I'd be happy to be your doctor and help you out with any issues that you have. Go to steadymd.com /Dr. Rick, and you'll find me there, and I'd be happy to help you out with any of your issues. So with that, if you have questions, we do have one more video in this series. So please send any questions you had from this presentation or anything else related to your gut that you want answers on. I'm going to be doing a more involved kind of Q&A for the next one, most likely, if we get some good answers, some good questions. And with that, that's all I've got, Tara.
I love it. So yeah, for those of you that have submitted questions already, keep doing that. I'm going to stay online. We'll release Dr. Henriksen in a few minutes, but please submit other questions that you're thinking about. I know a lot of things come to mind after a presentation as we start to think about it. So please send those in. That's really the time to get, down and dirty, to get your true questions asked by our expert here. So want to thank everybody for joining the presentation today. Great interaction with the questions that were submitted. And I think, let's start those conversations with our doctors. I know sometimes talking about these things are uncomfortable. It's not something that we want to talk about, diarrhea that we're having or excess gas, any of those things. But I think just to have that information to start the conversation with our doctor is, an amazing place to start with all the things that you've given us today. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Submit those questions, and we will talk to you next month.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks so much.
Have a great day, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.